The Australian Council for Student Voice acknowledges the traditional custodians of the unceded lands, skies and waterways on which we live, work and learn. We pay our deepest respects to elders past and present and honour the enduring knowledge, strength and cultures of First Nations peoples. For over 65,000 years, they have cared for country, its lands, skies and waters, since time immemorial. We especially recognise the leadership and voices of First Nations young people. As young people across these lands continue to advocate for treaty and healing, we commit to listening deeply, learning continuously and standing in solidarity. We acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, and we remain committed to a future grounded in truth, justice, and reconciliation.
Okay, good evening, everybody who's joined us or watching a recording of a presentation this evening, Voice Enactment, Understandings of Student Voice Across Australian Contexts, Shared Understandings. So my name's Melinda Kirk. I'm from Deakin University, a lecturer there, and joined by Heather Manning from Griffith University and Clara from University of Wollongong. And so we bring three different perspectives from three different states, from Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland. I personally am registered to teach in all three states currently, and might delve into that a little bit more in a moment. So before we commence this evening, though, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the lands in which we all gather this evening and pay our deepest respects and acknowledgement to all the ancestors, elders, First Nations people who may be joining us this evening or watching the recordings. So I mentioned just a moment ago that I have experience and registered in Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland as a teacher. And when I was a teacher, I was SRC convener and organising that for my students. And so it's a key interest in both my research and my PhD, which I've completed, and also teacher education. Now it's pre-service teachers as well, and also our children in our schools and early years as well, which Clara will delve into in a little bit more detail, as that's her key area of research as well. So just looking across Australia, there's a key word that tends to pop up across dialogue about student voice in policy, in even annual operation plans at schools, teacher language, and that's amplifying student voice. And so I'd like to take a moment to think about what that actually means in practice, and with the understanding that within research there's a clear, and within policy there's a clear value for amplifying student voice, the importance of student voice, with an emphasis primarily on supporting the development of leadership in policy across Australia. But there's been a recent shift also, and focus and continued focus that's needed on the importance of student voice as informing student engagement, the understanding that when student voice is part of the classroom and part of practice, then children and students are engaged and therefore their learning is supported. And that's recognised in frameworks for improving student outcomes such as VISO 2.0. And also that understanding that children need decision makers and adult support for their student voice, and their ideas, their goals, their perspectives to be responded to rather than just listened to. So looking at ways of collaborating with students to support learning and assessment. And also our SRCs, our student representative councils, which play an important part in developing student leadership in primary school and secondary school, and they are across Australia within our schools. So thinking about these things, there's a few things that are key considerations. So our critical considerations for even our SRCs is whose voice is being represented. And there is across the board generally an underrepresentation of young children. So primarily SRCs are for older students across Australia, and there's a real gap in early childhood and foundation to grade 2. So that's not to say that SRCs aren't valuable, they most certainly are, but how are we also supporting young children's voices? And there's a strong valuing of inclusive voice and that key consideration of whose voice and is a voice of only a few and who decides whose voice it is. And there's great research in that area for the likes for an example is Eve Mays to look at. So, and understanding also that student voice is conducive to supporting student well-being. And even in our post-COVID context, there's a real focus on supporting student well-being and student mental health, and that understanding that student voice enables insights and values students, their ideas, their feelings, and therefore supports their well-being. And we can see that represented in the next slide. So in the Australian education system, we have that Australian Student Wellbeing Framework, and so the interlinking and connection between inclusion, leadership, support and partnerships is recognised within student wellbeing, safety, positive relationships. But again, how is student voice actually enacted and supported is an ongoing challenge. So, as Mitch has been part of developing this fantastic with the Australian Student Council, the framework for student empowerment. So this goes a long way to bringing all of those ideas into place and how they are actually enacted in the classroom. So that's a key thing that I think will be fantastic in supporting further action into the future, and not only action, but also the understanding at the classroom level and how to enable that. So at the classroom level, the key questions continue and prevail. So how is student voice enabled? Whose voice is it? And this is drawing on Lundy's framing and key questions as well. And they need to really be at the forefront of how to support student voice and understanding as we understand it, with our perspectives coming together and collaborating across the different states. So whose voice? How is it enabled? How can it be expressed? How can we have open context for students to be able to express their voice? Who is listening? And not only who is listening, but how are we responding? So it's not enough for children just to be having a say and that promotion of student voice. It's also how we're responding and responsive to it. How are we supporting students to have, and children to have influence? So their voice to be supported and enacted, to be a real catalyst for desired change, for positive change for children and in their lives and learning. So within Victoria, so now each of us are going to talk a little bit about what's in place in each state and also a little bit about our research areas as well. So Victoria, there's a great history of fantastic advocates for student voice, such as Roger Holdsworth. And this is actually taken on the left-hand side of your screen directly from the Victorian Government website. And that actioning of empowering student voice through the Vic SRC cloud site, which came about through students advocating for it and the government investment realisation that, yes, students who are engaged are also empowered and supported to be successful and achieve. So there's almost an interplay with the government perspective that it's supporting student achievement as well. So There's also within Victoria the Amplify Toolkit. So there's lots of key supports for teachers and professional development to support. And again, you'll notice the word amplify to empower students, a student voice, agency and leadership. And that close association with student voice and agency with leadership as well. So just taking a big picture, look at it for a moment. So children and students' voice, we live in an ever-changing world and socio-ecological challenges, and children's voice isn't just in the classroom and things that they're interested and want to learn, but they have strong opinions and ideas about the future, the world that they'd like to live in. And we've seen that recently in recent years with even the climate strikes, school climate strikes. But how are students being enabled to actually see action? So they're not feeling like they're just having a voice yelling into the wind, but their voice can be elevated to find direction and supported to take action for desired change. And that's where my research project comes in. So my research was based in Melbourne here in the post-COVID context. So soon, very, very soon after lockdowns. And there were clear restrictions on even being able to be in school and doing a microbial investigation. And children make links with their real life. And I think that's part of really enabling student voice is being aware of children's connections with their real life. So there was that concern around health. So they had an understanding that microorganisms were associated with health risks. And as part of that, they, through science investigations, identified a real issue to them. And rather than just continuing with the curriculum unit that stated to go on and investigate yeast, which they really weren't particularly at that point interested in when they'd actually identified an issue that was relevant to them and said they wanted to do something about it. So my research was about enabling that. So having a responsive curriculum that's still aligned with learning intentions, success criteria for learning about microorganisms, for supporting students' inquiry skills, but having their voice elevated for real meaningful learning, but also they enacted change in their school as a result of it. So tomorrow I'm presenting more in depth about that particular project and how some supporting pedagogical approaches that were identified in analysis and student voice and agency actually emerged as the key finding of that research, although I was focused primarily and initially on critical and creative thinking and collaboration. That was my key focus area. Through doing so, student voice and agency were what were actually at the foreground. So I'll share more of that tomorrow, focused on that Lundy's framing of whose voice, how's it supported, who's listening, how can it be of an influence, and those key questions of that Lundy framing will continue through with my wonderful colleagues here this evening with Heather and Clara in their contexts of Queensland and New South Wales respectively, delving further into what that looks like in their contexts.
Thank you, Melinda. That was such a thorough discussion about the context of across Australia as well as the specific Victorian context. And so I'm Heather Manning and I'm a PhD candidate at Griffith University. My topic is children's embodied experience of classroom-based learning. And so the importance of voice here is in the subjective experience of the learner. So I'm specifically interested in how the the subject, who is the child in this, in year 2 children, are experiencing their environment. So student voice is very is crucial to that. It's embedded within that. And I'm going to be presenting a little bit about the Queensland policy context, and particularly some of the contrasts that I've noted between some of the other states and the way that the that student voice is presented to educators and to the wider public. And so you'll see on this first slide, I have a couple of images of foster king, and the reason I popped those there is when I went to look for what messaging there is amongst the policy documents as far as student voice, I really found that I was foster king. I had to go looking for the sections within various policy documents that related to student voice, and that's very much the case within the Queensland policy setting. There's explicit and implicit messaging, and a lot of it is more implicit, and I'm going to talk about that through the slides. So there's quite a significant variation across the sectors, and this probably does exist in the other states, but I think really what was notable about the Queensland context is that the explicit messaging around student voice was not found as clearly within the department materials, but found more clearly within a sector-specific settings such as the Brisbane Catholic Education Office. And they have got quite a framework around and materials to support schools and teachers in performing those amplifying acts that Melinda was talking about before. There's also quite a level of acknowledgement and involvement of student voice in post-secondary education settings such as TAFE University. Again, they're drawing on Australia-wide documents such as Student Voice Australasia. Many of the institutions have become member organisations there. But I'm specifically interested in the Queensland Government Department of Education, mainly because it is the broader, it's a higher proportion of schools and therefore a higher proportion of students involved there. And also that was the setting where my research was based. So the most recent strategic plan to be launched by the Department of Education does focus on students, but the way that it is worded to articulate what success looks like tends to be more sitting around what other people do around the students rather than what they perceive it to be themselves. And so, for example, I've just drawn out a couple of key statements here from this page of the strategic plan about the challenges to safeguard the well-being and safety of children. So protecting them rather than considering that well-being is actually, it's something that maybe the children tell us how well they are or not. It seems interesting that we can judge well-being without including the people who are well or not. And then also, again, in everything we must consider child and student protection. And so that seems to show a more protectionist perspective around student involvement, and there is a very detailed risk management document that I found. However, documents were specific around students contributing to the narrative and to their environments were harder to come by. And so a close-up of the goals of the strategic plan looked at the early years and children's starting, and here we could see that even that there was an emphasis on regulation. So again, that's deciding on quality from beyond the setting rather than within the setting. And when we're talking about them achieving and realising their full potential, that was also framed around learning outcomes and even attendance and engagement. And so I think that leaves a real gap in why are they attending or not attending, and what do they consider as engagement or not. It's like we've made some assumptions around what engagement is considered to be, rather than including the perspectives of the students within that particular framework. And so student voice is not absent altogether from the pedagogical frameworks when we're looking at what's going to happen within classrooms. So in 2016, in response to low levels of engagement in early primary students in Queensland, the age-appropriate pedagogies for learning were rolled out across all Queensland primary schools for the prep to year or foundation to year 2 students. And here we are quite specific about what student voice looks like. It's agentic, and that's them having a voice in their learning, that their ideas and interests initiate, support and extend those possibilities. And within these other pedagogies, there are also a high level of students' contribution and involvement. And so there is student involvement at the level of SRCs, as Melinda mentioned earlier, but this is talking more about how much are students being listened to in the everyday activities within their classroom. And so within the age-appropriate pedagogies, there are a number of actual sort of pedagogical approaches that are supported within that. And they vary as to the amount of involvement and student voice that is either amplified or maybe more silenced. And there's a range of approaches that are promoted, but it's really up to the teachers and up to the school and up to the individual context as to how they're going to practice those particular approaches. And so the degree to which students and children's voices are being listened to really becomes a local decision amongst that school, and it definitely varies according to the culture of the particular school and the values of the school leaders. And so even within schools, having this age-appropriate pedagogies framework that they are meant to be implementing, there are also school-based decisions, as I just said. And so in some of these cases, they form around more explicit teaching. And the issue here is that within this model, the teacher is made out to be the expert and the knower of how to do things and what to do, and the student's involvement is modelling the teacher and then eventually performing on their own without the teacher's support. So it's still very much framed around teacher competency rather than student competency. And so in that sense, it seems to contrast with some of that messaging around agency within the age-appropriate pedagogies. And so within my own research context, I was looking at year 2 students in their classroom in a state school, and I was interested in year 2 because it was the upper end of the early years, where the age-appropriate pedagogies were directed towards. However, it was the year prior to NAPLAN testing, and I was interested to listen to the students. They drew pictures, they talked to me, they wrote reflections, and we talked about how they felt that how they learn best and how that happened in their school. And so sometimes their examples of how they learn best actually were more drawn from what they considered to be non-learning. So things they were doing at recess, things that they would consider, oh, that's not really learning, that's just fun. And the importance of this is that the foundation of learning, as the Alice Springs Declaration explains, the foundation of learning for that NAPLAN testing is happening during those years that precede it, and of course the years prior, which Clara will speak a little bit more about in a minute. So to what extent are we supporting students to be involved in their learning, and to what extent are we concerned more about how they're going to perform on measures that adults have designed and defined as valuable knowledge? And so this is, and I'm still completing my PhD now and writing it up. And so there are certainly implications for how policy might be more explicitly descriptive of the type of practices that students enjoy doing. And it's interesting sort of seeing across the states and comparing the differences and then looking at how that might take place in the classroom. So I now hand over to Clara, who is going to talk more about out-of-school learning environments, and I hand over to her. So thank you.
Thanks, Melinda. Oh, sorry. Thank you so much, Heather, and thank you to Melinda. I am Dr. Maria Plara Rivera. I am a lecturer at the University of Wollongong in language and literacy. And I am here to talk to you about a specific context of voice enactment that has taken place in New South Wales. Now, I do not have a whole lot of knowledge about New South Wales policies around children's voice, and I'm sure there is plenty of those. But what some of the things that we might find that is quite common is that many of these initiatives would take place, as Melinda has mentioned, in the later stages of primary school, sort of like similar to this Minister Students' Council, that attempts to bring a bridge between the New South Wales public schools and students and the New South Wales Minister for Education for thinking about what students might be interested in. Another aspect of it that I found was a collaboration between New South Wales and ACT's Inclusion Agency, where they spoke to children and put together this resource for educators to help children think about what is about difference, what makes me, me, and what makes you, you, and how are we similar, how are we different, what is about belonging, thinking about, how do you welcome people? Do I feel welcome in certain places? And thinking about their voices about identity, for example, asking them questions about Australia Day. One of the things that I found really interesting in relation to early childhood, which is the context that I'm going to be speaking to you about today, is that there is no New South Wales specific early childhood policy around children's voice. In fact, it's more sort of like a national response to quality pedagogies around early childhood learning that actually support children's voice in more ways than one that you think this is actually the very ethos of what early childhood learning is. And in fact, if you can see here, Early Childhood Australia, which is a national body, their tagline is a voice for young children. So what I'm going to be talking to you about is a specific context that was part of an Australian Research Council Discovery Grant around conceptualizing children's understanding of digital play. And this was a project that I was part of along with Dr. Irina Verenikina and Professor Lisa Carvin. Now, before I start talking about this project, I also want to talk about children's use of digital technologies, because this is where the context of children's voice was explored. So in 2018, the Early Childhood Australia put together a statement on young children and digital technologies. And the idea around here was to give specific practice advice for early childhood educators so that they could really think about children's engagement with digital technologies, thinking about children's relationship with others in relation to their use of digital technologies, the development of their sense of citizenship, children's learning, development, health, and well-being. And if you think about these ideas, these are really broad ideas, but these are the policies that relate to not just children's use of digital technologies, but their overall well-being and learning and development. So from ECA's statement on young children and digital technologies, the Early Years Learning Framework, which is the guiding document for early childhood educators nationally, was updated in 2022, and it also started to include ways of drawing out children's voices around digital technologies. And I'll read you some of the outcomes and indicators that are in it. So for example, outcome 1 relates to children having a strong sense of identity. And here the EYLF talks about how children could be sharing with others how they have learned to use digital technologies. They could be co-using and collaborating others, having these interactions in relation to digital technologies. Outcome 2 is about children's connection and contribution to their world. So educators can, for example, can promote the use of digital technologies for children to explore solutions or assistance to community issues. So thinking about the child's voice and agency there. Outcome 3 is children having a strong sense of well-being. Give me a second. My screen's just disappeared. Hold on. Nearly there. All right. So where are we? I've lost my place. Children have a strong sense of well-being. So, for example, educators can promote and model the appropriate use of digital technologies and learn about e-safety. And while this is protectionist in nature, we can also think about outcome 4 where children are confident and involved learners because they can start exploring their environment and asking questions, experimenting, investigating, and using digital technologies. So think about the children's voice in that as involved, as confident and involved learners. And finally, through digital technologies, children can also meet outcome 5, which where they can engage in pretend play that draws on the use of digital technologies. So returning back to what we have here, moving forward from the EYLF, the Australian Research Council has now funded a Centre of Excellence for the Digital Child. And the focus of this research space is to conduct research around the positive digital childhoods of all Australian children, because it acknowledges that children's lived experiences are rapidly changing, and that every childhood is actually fundamentally digital. It involves digital technologies. And so they want to think about researching the healthy child, understanding how digital technology intersects with children's lived experiences, the educated child, equipping children with the skills they need to live their best digital lives, and the connected child, that they are conducting all these everyday experiences in safe digital spaces. So knowing these policies around children and digital technologies is a way of responding to the general media discourses that tend to be quite negative. And so in this context, we're going to think about children's voices. So what we have here is thinking about Lundy's participatory framework of giving children space and voice, and for them to have an audience and influence. And I will tackle first space and voice. Space has got to do with seeking children's opinions. We adults are mandated by the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of the Child to actually seek children's opinions on things that matter to them, on their everyday experiences. As long as it affects their lives, it is our responsibility to seek this out. And so we need to give children freedom to express their voices. So in this particular instance, the children took photos of spaces where digital play occurred at home, told us about their interesting experiences. They brought their own iPads, played their favorite apps, and they took screenshots of what was interesting to them. They created drawings and artworks. And so the children talked and drew and expressed their ideas in ways that they are familiar with, because that's how we draw children's voices, especially at this age. They're not going to be writing yet. They will be talking and they'll be sharing a lot of stories. So the children had freedom to choose whom they shared their views with a friend, in pairs, in a small group, or with a researcher. And so these 4 characters here are children's drawings as they share their ideas about what a preschooler app could be. Because what we did is we invited them to be co-researchers in co-designing a preschooler app. So next here is having a look at Lundy's framework of audience and influence. It has to be clear to children that they have an audience and that they are active in this process. Otherwise, what is the point of being part of this? So they're involved in the decision making. So then when they share their opinions and their thinking and their design ideas, they know that they have influence, that their ideas are actually changing some things. So for example, if they told us that these are their design ideas for each app, then we turned it into sort of like an app store where they can click on it and then hear the descriptions of what those app ideas are. And so when they drew the characters, these are the characters that are going to walk in the app. And when they told us that they wanted to be the faces of those characters, then we had to program it so that when they take a photo, it becomes the character in that preschooler app. And so this evolved through children giving us a criteria of what preschooler apps are like. They would say it's like a story, there's lots to touch, it's nothing scary because it's for young children. And this was put together in a model that put together a set of design principles for what preschoolers apps are from children's views. So they could say things like, well, it has to have ways of controlling it, and it should respond to everything that we do. That's lots to touch right there, control and multimodal response. When they say they would like to be part of that app, what they're really saying is they want to have representation in the apps that they play with and to have an expression of self. They also want it to be related to their real life experiences. These are the kinds of design ideas that they shared with us. And another thing that was really clear in what they wanted to put into the design of the app is that they're producers of their digital experiences and not just consumers. And so using this framework, we were able to work with the children to come up with some of their thinking. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try and play this video, and there's a script here, and this is sort of like a typical session with the children where they were explaining to us what it is that they wanted to see and what they were expecting. You could have opinions and ideas. Children can consider meaningful and authentic challenges relevant to their lives. So a children's rights approach opens a dialogue for a reciprocal exchange of ideas that value children's decision making. So what we have here is really thinking about what children can do when they're given a choice to participate, to share their ideas, and to really think about what they can offer to us as adults. At the end of this research project, the children launched the prototype of the app with their close families and friends here in this image here, and they spoke about their design ideas. As a result of that, Win News Illawarra came along to University of Wollongong to do a little report on what the children created, because everyone was so interested in what the children's design was going to be like. Following in from there, this woman here is a podcaster. She put together This Kid Life from the Sydney Opera House, and she interviewed our co-designers about their creation. And so another one of our co-designers is right here being interviewed at an ABC breakfast show. So what we're really seeing is when children are empowered, they can make choices and take action. They can stand up for what they think is right, and that is a positive digital childhood. And we can see how they can work together with others to show what they are thinking. And you will notice that this is taken from the Australian Student Council's framework that Mitch has put together with everybody and all the consultations. And so this was just one of the contexts that we could think of that might be interesting for you to see. And that's it for me. So I think Melinda is going to wrap it up, and I'll show the slide, Melinda, where you have the questions. Just give me a second. I'll share that now.
Yeah, so I guess when we put it all together, there were a few key pedagogies that went across our projects and things that we've seen with others as well. So drawing on the concrete and real experiences, enabling student voice in multimodal ways. And Clara and Heather, we all talked about that. So it's not only the verbal, but children drawing, children capturing images of things, making models. So bridging those possible barriers of verbal voice as well, or English second language. And so that's those dialogic practices, valuing students' voice, their ideas, also their questions, and pursuing those questions to find solutions. And so, yeah, there's a key of collaboration. So voice isn't always singular. So it's a way of connecting, building children's connection with others, building their sense of citizenship and purpose and ideas and value and identity, and amplifying their voice in the collective form as well. And with that possibility of building a community. So I talk in my research a little bit of inquiry approach, so that's more tomorrow, but enabling students to enact change. So that came up as key language in all of our presentations this evening and within the frameworks of student voice. So it's about not just elevating student voice, but responding to it and enabling transformation in their learning and their life. And we thank everybody for the opportunity to share our research and our context with you this evening. And I guess we have those questions that are ongoing about how, so those key considerations in everyday practice, how is it enabled, how the space, whose voice, how are we supporting it, and who's listening and responding, and how can we enable students to have influence?